June 25, 1958. Farnborough Airfield, Hampshire, England. Cold morning wind sweeps across the tarmac, carrying the bite of jet fuel and rain. Ground crews in blue coveralls huddle near a long shape hidden beneath a canvas sheet. No one speaks loudly, no one jokes, because under that canvas lies a machine that, according to rumors, should not even exist. Flight Lieutenant Graham "Hawk" Ellison tightens his gloves and walks toward it, boots echoing on wet concrete. He's flown Meteors, Sabres, Hunters, aircraft that earned their respect in blood and speed. But this is something else entirely. A group of visiting American Air Force officers watches from behind a barrier. Among them is Major Ross Delaney, a decorated test pilot who's seen experimental prototypes come and go. But even he leans forward, almost involuntarily, as a whistle pierces the air. The canvas is pulled away, and the world changes. The aircraft beneath gleams like polished silver, sharp, narrow, almost predatory. The wings are so thin they seem drawn with a knife. The nose points straight to the clouds, daring the sky to deny it. And the fuselage? A perfect chrome cylinder built not to fly, but to pierce. The F-104 Starfighter, nicknamed by American pilots the missile with a man inside. Delaney exhales. So the stories were true. Ellison climbs into the cockpit. Tight, metallic, more like a capsule than an airplane. He slides the canopy shut. The world outside becomes muffled, still, anticipating. Starfighter 1, you are cleared for acceleration run. Control calls. Acceleration run, not test flight, not takeoff. Because what's about to happen is closer to a weapons demonstration than aviation. Ellison releases the brakes. The J-79 engine unleashes a metallic scream. Then the Starfighter lunges forward like a fired round. Concrete blurs. The horizon shudders. Before the Americans can blink, the jet is airborne, climbing almost vertically. In the cockpit, Ellison feels the world flatten behind him. 40,000 feet, 50, climbing, accelerating. Starfighter 1, you are passing Mach 1.2, Mach 1.3. The Americans stare at the radar plot, disbelief spreading across their faces. No British aircraft had ever climbed like this. No American one had either. Then a whisper from Delaney. If this thing works, it rewrites the rules. But speed has a cost. Wings this thin don't forgive mistakes. Engines this hungry don't tolerate hesitation. And as Ellison begins his descent, the jet shudders, just enough to remind him that the Starfighter may be the future. But it's a future balanced on the edge of a knife. He lands safely. The Americans rush forward. The British engineers cheer. But Ellison? He simply steps out, helmet under his arm, eyes distant. Because he knows, today he beat the missile. Tomorrow, it might beat someone else. As Ellison steps away from the chrome beast, the Americans exchange uneasy glances. Because what happened in that English sky wasn't just a test flight. It was the opening shot of a technological arms race no one could publicly acknowledge. To understand why the Starfighter mattered, we rewind 5 years. Back to 1953, Lockheed's Skunk Works in Burbank, California. A dusty hangar lit by bare bulbs, welding sparks, drafting tables scattered with hand-drawn blueprints. This is where Clarence Kelly Johnson, the legendary engineer behind the P-38 Lightning and U-2 spy plane, threw down a challenge to his team. Build the smallest possible airframe around the most powerful engine in the world. No frills, no excess, just raw, unapologetic speed. Every other aircraft designer in the West was thinking bigger. Bigger wings, bigger engines, bigger radar. But Johnson believed speed itself was the ultimate weapon. If a jet could climb above any Soviet interceptor and outrun any missile, who needed armor? Who needed size? And so, piece by piece, they built a machine that was barely an airplane at all. The wings were only 7 feet long, shorter than a grown man. The fuselage was shaped like a rifle barrel. The cockpit sat so high on the spine it felt like riding a bullet. American test pilots who first saw the prototype in '54 joked, "Where do you strap the pilot? On the outside?" But their jokes ended the moment the J-79 engine ignited. The Starfighter didn't taxi. It stalked. It didn't lift off. It stabbed upward. And every pilot who touched its controls understood instantly. This was the fastest low-altitude aircraft ever conceived. By early 1958, whispers about its climb rate and Mach performance leaked into NATO channels. Even the Soviet Air Defense Command took notice, reportedly calling the F-104 a silver ghost, a jet so fast that radar operators wondered if it was a glitch. But the Americans kept the jet shrouded in secrecy. Even many within the US Air Force had never seen it fly. So when Britain received a testbed model for evaluation, the world finally caught a glimpse of the future, sleek, metallic, and terrifying. Back in Farnborough, as the Americans debrief with Ellison, Major Delaney watches the starfighter's wings glint under the noon sun. "This thing," he says quietly, "is built for one purpose: climb faster than anything alive." But he also notices the landing skid marks on the runway, the jittery descent, the brutal speed at touchdown. The starfighter wasn't just rewriting the rulebook, it was tearing pages out. And the pilots who dared to fly it would soon discover that the same razor-sharp design that shattered records could just as easily shatter lives. Because the aircraft that frightened the Soviets most would soon be feared just as deeply by the men who flew it. 2 months after the Farnborough demonstration, the Starfighter arrived at Edwards Air Force Base, shimmering under the California sun like a polished blade. The Americans had watched it fly in England. Now they would have to tame it. Captain Raymond "Brick" Saunders, a Korean War veteran known for nerves of steel, walked toward the F-104 with a crowd of mechanics trailing behind him. Even he, a man who once flew through flak clouds over Pyongyang, hesitated at the sight of the jet waiting on the ramp. It didn't sit on the ground. It coiled, as if ready to strike. Saunders tapped the razor-thin wing with 2 fingers. "It's like they forgot to finish the airplane," he muttered. A younger pilot, Lieutenant Marty Reyes, laughed nervously. "Or they built it for someone who isn't planning on coming back." Saunders didn't crack a smile, because he knew what was coming. The engine startup rattled the hangar windows. As the J-79 roared awake, heat ripples shimmered behind the tailpipe. Even the ground crew stepped back. The starfighter didn't just make noise, it announced itself with authority. Moments later, Saunders climbed into the cockpit, clipped the harness, and lowered the bubble canopy. The world went silent except for the rising whine of the engine. Control crackled over the radio. "Eagle 1, cleared for takeoff. Godspeed." The starfighter leapt forward. What happened next would be quoted for decades. Saunders later described it like this: "I didn't take off. I was launched." The needle-winged jet shot across the desert like a silver dart. In seconds, it was airborne, climbing straight into the blue, leaving a sonic ripple shaking the dry sand below. Pilots watching from the tower fell silent. At 35,000 feet, Saunders pushed the throttle further. Mach 1.4, Mach 1.7, Mach 2. The F-104 didn't hesitate. It demanded more. But at that speed, the sky was no longer soft. It was a battlefield of thin air and violent temperature shifts. A small shudder rippled through the fuselage. Warning lights flickered. Saunders steadied his breathing. Easy. Easy now. The starfighter wasn't trying to kill him, but it wasn't trying to save him either. This was a jet that expected perfection. And that was the problem. Most Air Force pilots had never flown an aircraft with wings so small, margins so narrow, or stall speed so deadly. Even slight misjudgments could send the starfighter into an unrecoverable dive. Saunders managed to bring it back, barely, slamming onto the runway with a force that made engineers flinch. He climbed out of the cockpit, helmet dripping with sweat. Marty Reyes jogged over, wide-eyed. "How was it, Captain?" Saunders stared at the aircraft, gleaming, merciless, magnificent. Then he whispered, "Fastest damn thing I've ever flown, and God help the pilot who forgets that." Because the starfighter didn't care about bravado. It didn't care about experience. It respected only precision. And soon, America would discover exactly why pilots around the world would both admire it and fear it. The roar of Saunders' landing still echoed across Edwards Air Force Base when the debriefing room fell into a heavy silence. Engineers scribbled notes. Commanders stood with crossed arms. Pilots whispered among themselves, torn between awe and unease. Because what Captain Saunders experienced at altitude wasn't just speed, it was the edge of survivability. Over the next few weeks, more pilots took the starfighter into the desert sky, and each one returned with the same tremor in his voice. "It flies like a rocket. It lands like a brick. One mistake and you're a headline." Lieutenant Marty Reyes was next to face the beast. Younger, eager, and convinced he was born to fly fast, he walked to the aircraft with the confidence of a man who believed danger was something that happened to other people. The starfighter waited under the sun, its metal skin glowing white-hot. Reyes strapped in, saluted ground crew, and launched down the runway. At altitude, he felt invincible. The jet responded like it was wired to his nerves. Every movement tight, sharp, alive. The California desert curved below, a painting of reds and golds. But when Reyes began his descent, he discovered why older pilots called the aircraft the unforgiving teacher. The F-104 didn't slow down. It refused to slow down. Its small wings, perfect for high-speed interception, provided almost no lift at lower speeds. Approaching the runway felt like balancing a coin on its edge. Reyes lowered the throttle. The aircraft dipped. The angle steepened. Control tower called out, "Eagle 2, you're too low. Increase pitch." Reyes pulled back. Nothing. The nose barely responded. The Starfighter was dropping like a spear. For a split second, panic flashed across his face. He punched the throttle. The engine roared. The jet jerked upward, just enough to avoid disaster. He slammed onto the runway, skidding, wobbling, leaving black streaks across the concrete. When he finally stopped, he leaned forward, breathing hard, hands trembling. The control tower broke the silence. "Eagle 2, welcome back." Hours later, Reyes sat alone in the hangar, staring at the jet that nearly buried him. Saunders joined him, lowering himself onto a crate. "So?" Saunders asked softly. "You still love it?" Reyes swallowed. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's deadly." Saunders nodded. "That's the problem. This aircraft gives you everything: speed, altitude, power. But it takes just as much back. And if you're not perfect every second, it cashes the check." Word spread quickly among pilots. The Starfighter wasn't just a fast aircraft, it was a test of survival. A machine that rewarded precision and punished weakness. And America was about to learn that in the hands of NATO allies, that razor edge would become a tragedy. By 1960, the Starfighter had become more than an aircraft. It was a symbol, a promise, a weapon of the future. And NATO countries, desperate to counter growing Soviet air power, signed contracts at a pace that stunned even Lockheed executives. West Germany, Italy, Belgium, Canada, the Netherlands. Each nation wanted the manned missile guarding its skies. But what they didn't realize was this. They were buying an interceptor designed for the American desert, not the fog, rain, and tide valleys of Europe. The first country to learn this lesson the hard way was West Germany. Büchel Air Base, West Germany, Spring 1963. German pilot Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Müller, only 24 years old, walks toward his new F-104G. It gleams beautifully under the morning sun, wearing fresh Luftwaffe markings. Ground crews snap photos. Commanders clap him on the shoulder. This, his squadron leader tells him, is the aircraft that makes the Soviets sweat. Müller smiles. He believes it. Moments later, the J-79 engine screams to life. The Starfighter surges forward. Another proud pilot joins the elite. But European skies are not gentle. Low clouds roll in fast. Rain hits the canopy like thrown gravel. Visibility drops to the length of a football field. And the Starfighter, with its narrow wings and high stall speed, is not made for this. At 12,000 feet, Müller enters a banked turn. Routine, harmless. But the instruments bounce. Static bursts in his radio. Moisture freezes along the canopy edges. Then, a shudder, a snap, a sudden pitch downward. Müller fights the controls, but the aircraft reacts sluggishly, as if trapped in invisible hands. The F-104G, now heavy with European radar equipment and extra hardpoints, stalls brutally. The Starfighter rolls, dips, spins. Ground radar tries to reach him. "Volkswagen, pull up, pull up!" But there is no pulling up. The jet disappears behind a ridge. Fireball, shockwave, silence. Another young pilot gone. Within 2 years, German newspapers would coin a name that haunted the Luftwaffe. Witwenmacher, the Widowmaker. Across NATO, the pattern repeats. Canadian pilots lose control during steep descents. Italian aircraft strike the ground during low-level attack runs. Belgian starfighters stall during approaches and never recover. Investigators point fingers. Some blame the weather. Some blame inexperience. Some blame Lockheed's pressure on NATO contracts. But pilots know the truth whispered in ready rooms and hangars. The Starfighter is incredible at what it was designed to do, and lethal at everything else. At high altitude, it is a spear thrown by the gods. But down low, where NATO pilots must fly to avoid Soviet radar, it becomes a trap made of aluminum and ambition. Still, the Cold War rages. The Soviets deploy faster interceptors, new missiles, larger bomber fleets. NATO cannot turn back. And so, despite the funerals, despite the rising fear, despite the whispered jokes about buying two, one to fly and one for spare parts, the Starfighter spreads across Europe like a silver-winged promise. A promise soaked in danger. A promise soon to be overshadowed by scandal. Because behind the accidents, behind the contracts, behind the deaths, a darker truth is about to surface. Something that will shake NATO, Congress, and the world. While NATO pilots struggled to control the Starfighter in the sky, a different kind of turbulence was unfolding far below, one that had nothing to do with aerodynamics and everything to do with power, pressure, and politics. By 1965, whispers had begun circulating through defense ministries in Europe. Rumors that Lockheed, under immense pressure to secure international contracts, had pushed far beyond normal diplomacy. And in Bonn, West Germany, those whispers began turning into accusations. Documents leaked, meetings exposed, names surfaced. At the center of the storm was an explosive allegation. Lockheed had paid millions in secret commissions to ensure the Starfighter was chosen over safer, more suitable aircraft. West Germany became the epicenter of the scandal. Bonn, Federal Ministry of Defense. Winter, 1966. Inside a smoke-filled conference room, Defense Minister Franz Josef Strauss slams a folder shut. Across the table, his aides sit stiffly, eyes downcast. Lockheed insists these are performance bonuses, one aide mutters. Strauss glares at him. Bonuses? For what? Burying half the Luftwaffe. Outside the building, reporters gather like vultures, shouting questions about corruption, kickbacks, and the mounting Starfighter death toll. Because by now Germany had lost over 60 aircraft, and the number was climbing. Public trust was collapsing. Parliament demanded answers. The nation wanted accountability. And for the first time, the Starfighter's greatest enemy wasn't Soviet interceptors. It was political fire. Across the Atlantic, Lockheed executives watched nervously. The company had bet its future on overseas contracts. Billions of dollars were tied to the F-104 program. Factories, jobs, research, all depended on keeping NATO customers happy. But the scandals wouldn't stay quiet. Soon, investigators uncovered similar payments in Italy, Japan, and the Netherlands. The word bribery appeared in international headlines. Congressional committees in Washington demanded hearings. In 1976, the truth finally detonated. The Lockheed scandal erupted publicly, shaking governments worldwide. During testimony, executives admitted that foreign officials had been paid, not to buy the Starfighter outright, but to favor it, promote it, push it ahead of competing aircraft. Money had flowed beneath the table. Careers were destroyed. Allies were humiliated. And worst of all, pilots had died flying aircraft they were never meant to operate in their environment, because politics moved faster than safety. But while the scandal revealed corruption, it also exposed something deeper. Many NATO air forces weren't just victims of politics. They were victims of a fundamental misunderstanding. The F-104 was never meant to be a multi-role fighter, a bomber, or a low-level attack aircraft. It was designed for one mission: intercept Soviet bombers at high altitude, fast. Europe turned it into something else, something it was never built to be. And the consequences were deadly. Yet even as governments faced fallout, another twist emerged, one no one expected. The Soviets, who once feared the Starfighter, were now laughing at NATO's misfortune. Because to them, the West had turned a masterpiece of performance into a graveyard of pilots. But the story wasn't over, because the aircraft that had been mocked, feared, and scandalized was about to prove its worth in a place no one anticipated. A place where skill, not politics, determined survival. While Europe grappled with scandal and loss, a different story was unfolding thousands of miles away. In the sun-scorched deserts and crystal-clear skies of Asia, another nation was preparing to test the Starfighter, not as a political symbol, but as a weapon of necessity. Taiwan, the Republic of China Air Force, ROCAF, a frontline state staring directly across the strait at its greatest enemy. Unlike Europe, Taiwan understood from day one that the F-104 was a high-altitude interceptor, and in the tense air duels with the People's Republic of China during the 1960s, the Starfighter would finally do what it had been designed for: hunt enemy aircraft at altitude, fast, violently, decisively. Chiayi Air Base, Taiwan, January 1967. As dawn breaks, Captain Fang Chi-wei walks toward his F-104A, its polished aluminum nose glowing under the rising sun. This isn't a diplomatic trophy or a NATO procurement headache. This is survival. Moments later, ground radar blares. Bandits crossing the strait. Multiple MiG-19s inbound. Engines scream to life across the base. Pilots sprint. Adrenaline ignites. The starfighters launch in pairs, streaking upward like silver arrows. Their mission is simple. Intercept, engage, return alive. As Fang climbs past 40,000 feet, he spots contrails slicing through the sky. MiGs, approaching fast. Falcon lead, tally 2 bandits at 1 o'clock high. He pushes the throttle. The J-79 engine responds like an unleashed animal. Mach 1 zu 6, Mach 1 zu 8. The F-104 becomes a dart, a streak of light, a weapon given wings. The first kill. One of the MiGs breaks formation to engage. Bad decision. Fang rolls inverted, dives slightly, and positions himself behind the enemy jet. He arms his AIM-9 Sidewinder missile. A tone sounds, a lock, a heartbeat. Whoosh! The missile snaps free, spiraling toward its target. A flash, smoke, debris. Fang calls it in calmly, Splash 1 MiG. It is the first recorded air-to-air kill by an F-104, and it won't be the last. Over the next decade, Taiwanese starfighters would claim multiple victories against Chinese fighters, MiG-19s, MiG-21s, proving that in the hands of well-trained pilots operating in clear skies, the Widowmaker was no widow at all. It was a predator. The world notices. Suddenly, the narrative begins to shift. Military analysts in Washington whisper, maybe we judged it too harshly. NATO commanders mutter, maybe we tried to make it something it wasn't. Even Soviet observers quietly note that the starfighter, when used correctly, is a terrifying opponent. For the first time since its troubled debut, the F-104 finds something like redemption, not in the hangars of Europe, but in the high thin air over the Taiwan Strait. A place where speed matters, where altitude is life, where pilots accept the risks, and where the starfighter is allowed to be what it truly is. A missile with a man inside, finally pointed at the right enemy. But the story isn't finished, because soon the aircraft that earned fear, controversy, and newfound respect would face its final chapter, and its legacy would surprise the world. By the late 1980s, the F-104 had already carved a controversial path through aviation history. It had gone from feared interceptor to political scandal to unexpected battlefield predator. Most aircraft end their careers quietly, museum pieces, forgotten relics of forgotten wars. But not the starfighter. Even as NATO retired its squadrons and the US moved on to sleeker fighters like the F-15 and F-16, a small but dedicated circle of aviators refused to let the manned missile fade into silence. They were civilians, former military pilots, engineers, thrill seekers, dreamers, and they believed the starfighter was more than a machine. It was an experience. A chapter of Cold War engineering that deserved to live. And so, in scattered hangars across America, Canada, and Europe, the F-104 began to rise again. One restoration, one polished fuselage, one roaring J-79 engine at a time. Mojave Air and Spaceport. Summer 1995. The sun beats hard on the California desert as a small crowd gathers around a gleaming, mirror-finished F-104. Its nose is razor-sharp, its wings still dangerously thin. The aircraft looks like a museum piece, until the crew chief shouts, "Clear the area!" A moment later, the J-79 engine ignites with a thunderous crack, sending heat distortion rippling across the tarmac. The crowd erupts in cheers. Children cover their ears. Retired pilots grin silently, the memories flooding back. At the controls sits Rick Blaze Harriman, a former USAF test pilot. He grips the throttle, eyes steady, heartbeat calm. "This one's for every guy who ever loved this jet," he whispers. He releases the brakes. And just like in 1958, the starfighter launches off the runway, fast, violent, unapologetic. Dust whirls in spirals behind it as the jet rockets into the sky, climbing with the same breathtaking speed that once stunned American intelligence and terrified Soviet radar operators. In that moment, the crowd isn't watching an old fighter plane. They're watching a resurrection. The airshow era. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, restored starfighters became the stars of airshows worldwide. They didn't just fly, they performed. Vertical climbs that seemed to defy gravity, vapor cones forming around their thin wings, sonic boom close passes that rattled spectators' bones, dazzling chrome surfaces reflecting the sun like a blade. People gasped every time, Because no modern fighter, not even an F-22, felt as raw as the Starfighter. This was aviation stripped to its fundamentals: an engine, two wings, and a human being willing to risk it all. A symbol of human nerve. Airshow commentators often introduced it the same way. Ladies and gentlemen, the F-104 Starfighter, the airplane that proved sometimes the line between brilliance and danger is only 7 feet wide. And the crowd would cheer, not out of fear, but out of respect. For the men who flew it, for the engineers who dared to build it, for the legacy of a jet that refused to be forgotten. Because somehow, against all odds, the aircraft once mocked as a widowmaker had become a legend people were proud to see take the sky again. A glittering, roaring reminder that history's sharpest edges are often the ones worth preserving. By the early 2000s, only a handful of Starfighters still roared across the sky, polished, restored, flown by pilots who respected the jet's dangerous beauty. Most museums displayed them behind ropes, silent and gleaming. But one group believed the aircraft deserved more than quiet retirement. They believed the Starfighter still had one more mission. In 2011, Starfighters Aerospace, a private American company, assembled a fleet of fully restored F-104s in Florida. Their goal wasn't airshows or nostalgia. Their goal was to take the manned missile back to the edge of space. Kennedy Space Center, April 2013. Thunderclouds drift lazily over the Florida coast as technicians in flight suits gather around a row of silver F-104s. Their wings shimmer in the morning sun. Their engines sit silent, waiting. At the center stands pilot Rick Blaze Harriman, now older, calmer, but carrying the same fierce respect for the aircraft beneath him. He runs a hand across the fuselage. Cool metal, cold precision, a relic that still feels alive. Hard to believe this thing was built in the 50s. A young engineer says. Harriman smiles. It was built ahead of the 50s. Their mission today: simulate near-space conditions for research instruments, microgravity tests, high-altitude experiments, supersonic flight profiles. No other private aircraft on Earth can replicate these environments, except the Starfighter. Harriman climbs aboard. The canopy seals. The engine ignites with a scream that vibrates every building within a mile. Tower control calls out. Starfighter 1, cleared for takeoff. Proceed on profile ascent. He pushes the throttle. The aircraft surges forward, faster than the eye can track. In seconds, airborne, in moments, ascending like a missile shot into the atmosphere. The altimeter spins. 30,000 feet, 40,000, 60,000. The sky turns from blue to ink. The curvature of Earth appears beneath him. Light bends differently up here, sharper, cleaner, untouched. And Harriman whispers the same words that pilots once said in the Cold War. This isn't flying, this is being fired into the heavens. The legacy. By the time the Starfighter glides back to Kennedy's runway, its mission complete, technicians cheer. Cameras flash. The old warplane rolls to a stop, exhaust steaming, metal gleaming, heart still wild. It is the last of its kind, still pushing boundaries, still climbing higher than it should, still defying the quiet fate of history. The F-104 began its life feared by intelligence agencies. It became a scandal, a triumph, a tragedy. It killed pilots. It saved nations. It stunned adversaries. It inspired generations. And in its final chapter, it transformed from a Cold War weapon into a scientific instrument reaching for space. A machine that lived on the knife's edge. A legend forged in chrome, fire, and impossible ambition. The manned missile. The jet that refused to be forgotten. End.